Welcome to the 60th episode of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We are now in book 6, The Remedy, and we are in chapter 1, Insufficiencies of the Remedies Currently Advocated, and we read through the first currently advocated remedy, which was efficiency in government, and now we will read through the second uh, proposed remedy that is insufficient. Spoiler alert. It is called From the Diffusion of Education and Improved Habits of Industry and Thrift. The Get Good Argument. There is and always has been a widespread belief among the more comfortable classes that the poverty and suffering of the masses are due to their lack of industry, frugality, and intelligence. This belief, which at once soothes the sense of responsibility and flatters by its suggestion of superiority, is probably even more prevalent in countries like the United States, where all men are politically equal and where, owing to the newness of there's a white text overlay on the screen. Oh, I see that. Weird. What? I pasted this. Thank you. I think I hit some bad input there on OBS. Um, Yes, this is more prevalent in the US, where men are equal, and owing to the newness of society, the differentiation into classes has been of individuals rather than of families. Than it is in older countries, where the lines of separation have been longer and are more sharply drawn. It is but natural for those who can trace their own better circumstances to the superior industry and frugality that gave them a start, and the superior intelligence that enabled them to take advantage of every opportunity. The rich kids. To say nothing of superior want of conscience, which is often the determining quality which makes a millionaire out of one who otherwise might have been a poor man. The want of conscience. To imagine that those who remain poor do so simply from lack of these qualities. Yeah, that's the de Tocqueville quote I was looking for about American society, that we all presume we live in a meritocracy. But we do not, he says, or something like he says it's thought that anybody who really works hard and is smart will get rich. Something like that. But of course I can't even find the quote. George goes on, but whoever has grasped the laws of the distribution of wealth, as in previous chapters they have been traced out, will see the mistake in this notion. The fallacy is similar to that which would be involved in the assertion that every one of a number of competitors might win a race. That any one might is true, that everyone might is impossible. So, I don't know, there's this like thread or whatever going around Twitter showing how the elites, even after certain periods of serious upheaval in different countries, re-emerge in a generation or two. Um, Notably in like the whatever revolution in China, where everyone of a high class was like intentionally uh, had their land taken and they were put into camps and stuff. I don't know. They were a few generations later in just as good a position. Similarly, like the samurai class in Japan, those people regain their status later. I don't know. I don't know what if it's true that some families are just gonna be superior in whatever way, genetically or whatever, and they rise to the top. It doesn't really much matter, because in any society you're gonna have a stratum, um, and there will be people who are better, are superior economical operators, actors, and there are those who are worse. When you apply for a job, there's only one job, and if there's, or if there's 100 people on 100 jobs, you know, assuming there's some good jobs and some bad jobs, then the best performers will get the good jobs, and the worst performers get the bad jobs. The question is, if we accept that, which seems just a fact of life, do we have to accept that the top 20 will live a good life and the bottom 20 will barely survive and be miserable? And I don't think we do. The land value tax allows for everybody to prosper together. So it doesn't necessarily, like, I think it's like coincidental that the land owning class, I mean it, yeah. Even if you think that that like the people who end up becoming the land owning class are the superior people, that doesn't justify the organization of our society. This is something, I sort of blogged about this recently. The rich kids, like, you may be the best of the best of the best. So you sort of look at your stake in life and your mansion and you're like, yeah, I kick butt. Um, and it's like kind of hard to disagree in certain cases. I know some very wealthy, very competent, very kind people. Uh, but they're, and I'm not looking to chop their heads off and take all of their money and give it to somebody else. But I want some of what they have. Yeah, I want, I want that which is taken unfairly redistributed fairly. That which is taken fairly is fair. But what is, yeah. Anyway. Tablecat says in the chat, if a person who is alone may not necessarily be lonely, does that mean a person in such a bad situation need not necessarily be miserable? Your first comment, that made me think, is being miserable subjective? Yeah, I don't see how you could sort of, when applying it to a single person, I would say so. When you're talking about the general tendency of humans, Homo sapiens, I think you can generally say the people who are super uncertain about where their next meal is coming from have to deal with a certain regularity of physical discomfort, um, are not able to necessarily stay with their family or determine their own, uh, I don't know, life direction. You can say as a class they're miserable, but certainly certain members may not be so. Anyway, we'll get back to George. Yes, the want of conscience. And that might be so. Like, I don't know anybody who is super rich because of some business they started that I know in detail. Like, the wealthy people I know are mostly um, just high performance, like, professionals. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, and some of them come from families of doctors, lawyers, engineers. I guess I know of some business people who have been successful, but they've not, or I know of some people's parents or something who've been successful in business, but I do not. Well, okay, never mind. I have a whole bunch of friends who all work for one. I don't know the guy who started the business in college. Well, he didn't start in college. It was his dad's business. He worked for it. I didn't know the guy. A bunch of my friends in college knew the guy, and now they all work for that company. And it is definitely, uh, it's all about avoiding tax. It's just a financial service to super wealthy people. It's really hard for me to look at that business and see how it's actually creating any wealth. It's simply helping. They manage millions or maybe billions of dollars of assets and avoid taxes, specifically capital gains taxes, and they look for more investment opportunities. They're really big into REITs. I guess that's, yeah, and I have like 4 friends who work for that company. One of them is pretty high up. The others are just working like a regular boring old wage because that was a job they could get and from a friend. I don't know. Anyway, this was a huge aside. There are, at the end of the day, there are those who have land monopoly. However they got there, that could be they could have gotten there because of their superior qualities. They could have gotten there because of inheritance. Whatever. The fact of the matter is, they exist as landowners now. So George writes, well, Tablecat says, this is oddly similar to game theory where a situation under the looking glass from a single person cannot be compared to looking at the situation overall. Yes, and as George says, when we're talking about economics, we are looking for these general tendencies. It's danger, or not a danger. He never says it's dangerous, but like, it's sort of a distraction when you look at individuals or exceptional cases. Yet, we are all individuals and exceptional cases. um, Everything boils down to taxes, Tablecat says. That's right, sort of. Do I know any career criminals though? Uh, not that I know of. I mean, I guess I've met a few drug dealers. Not as a patron. The fallacy. All right, George writes. Whoever has grasped the laws of the distribution of wealth, as in previous chapters they have been traced out, will see the mistake in this notion. The fallacy is similar to that which would be involved in the assertion that every one of a number of competitors might win a race. I already read this. That any one might is true, that every one might is impossible. For as soon as land acquires a value, wages, as we have seen, do not depend upon the real earnings or product of labor, but upon what is left to labor after rent is taken out. And when land is all monopolized, as it is everywhere except in the newest communities, rent must drive wages down to the point at which the poorest paid class will be just able to live and reproduce. Typo. Be just able to live and reproduce, and thus wages are forced down to a minimum fixed by what is called the standard of comfort, that is, the amount of necessaries and comforts which habit leads the working class to demand as the lowest on which they will consent to maintain their numbers. It's kind of like there's a giant union of Americans everywhere, or people everywhere, and they together, uh, you know, what did they call that? Corporate negotiation, whatever. I always forget that word. Group negotiation to demand what we now have as a minimum wage. Um, but the minimum wage we now have is a little bit better than what would happen if we didn't have the government forcing it. However, of course, you raise the minimum wage in the United States, landlords raise rents. This being the case, industry skill, frugality, and intelligence can avail the individual only insofar as they are superior to the general level, just as in a race, speed can avail the runner only insofar as it exceeds that of his competitors. If one man work harder or with superior skill or intelligence than ordinary, he will get ahead. But if the average of industry skill or intelligence be brought up to the higher point, the increased intensity of application will secure but the old rate of wages, and he who would get ahead must work harder still. I have the same feeling about dating advice. There's like tons of people out there, telling young people, men and women, how to become more desirable and how to be successful in dating, and that will help the individuals who heed that advice. But will And I suppose if everyone everywhere heeded that advice, one effect would be to just cause more people to aggressively interact with each other. And so there would be some amount of a total increase in relationships. But I think what's more interesting to me about the social issue around dating would be some kind of structural problem with our society of a lack of interaction and a chance for connections to happen between men and women. I honestly think college is a very now we're just going down a different sorry. All right. George writes, one individual may save money from his wages by living as Dr. Franklin did when, during his apprenticeship and early journeyman days, he concluded to practice vegetarianism, and many poor families might be made comfortable by being taught to prepare the cheap dishes to which Franklin tried to limit the appetite of his employer, Keimer, as a condition to his acceptance of the position of confuter of opponents to the new religion of which Keimer wished to become the prophet. I don't remember this at all. Franklin, in his inimitable way, relates how Keimer finally broke his resolution and, ordering a roast pig, invited two lady friends to dine with him. But the pig being brought in before the company arrived, Keimer could not resist the temptation and ate it all himself. What is this story? I don't even know. Oh, this reminds me that I'm not praising this again. Alright, here we are in this subcategory 2 from the diffusion of education and improved habits of industry and thrift. Um, People think poor people should just work harder. This lets rich, successful people feel good about their position. This is more severe in USA than in old world. What else? Uh, Hard work and intelligence only provide a relative benefit, like the like a race can only be won by one runner. Were everyone to get smarter and work harder, no laborer would receive higher wages. Note, I think this is similar to dating and to the what do we call it? The bloating of education. Uh, Funny anecdote about Franklin feeding Keimer veggies. Okay. A new religion, Keimer is going to be that. But if the working classes generally came to live in that way, wages would ultimately fall in proportion, and whoever wished to get ahead by the practice of economy or to mitigate poverty by teaching it, like and subscribe and share and comment on this very podcast or YouTube video. Uh, it struck me that I never appeal for such interactivity. I am sometimes conflicted about these kinds of things, but also I don't know. I don't care anymore to think about it. I'm just saying, give me a shout. Tell me if you're out there. um, working class generally can live that way. Wages would ultimately fall in proportion, and whoever wished to get ahead by the practice of economy or to mitigate poverty by teaching it would be compelled to devise some still cheaper mode of keeping soul and body together. Yeah, if everyone started eating only rice and beans, eventually everyone's wages would even go down more because the landlords would realize they had this extra money they could the landlords could siphon away. If under existing conditions American mechanics would come down to the Chinese standard of living, they would ultimately have to come down to the Chinese standard of wages. Or if English laborers would content themselves with the rice diet and scanty clothing of the Bengali, labor would soon be as ill paid in England as in Bengal. The introduction of the potato into Ireland was expected to improve the condition of the poorer classes by increasing the difference between the wages they received and the cost of their living. But the consequences that did ensue were a rise of rent and a lowering of wages, and with the potato blight, the ravages of famine among a population that had already reduced its standard of comfort so low that the next step was starvation. Yeah, I'm always going through this and sort of like happy go lucky, and then it's like, oh yeah, this is uh this is really life and death. I am in the privileged class. And so, if one individual work more hours than the average, he will increase his wages, but the wages of all cannot be increased in this way. It is notorious that in occupations where working hours are long, wages are not higher than where working hours are shorter, generally the reverse. For the longer the working day, the more helpless does the laborer become. The less time he has, the less time has he to look around him and develop other powers than those called forth by his work. The less becomes his ability to change his occupation or to take advantage of circumstances. And so the individual workman who gets his wife and children to assist him may thus increase his income, but in occupations where it has become habitual for the wife and children of the laborer to supplement his work, it is notorious that the wages earned by the whole family do not on the average exceed those of the head of the family in occupations where it is usual for him only to work. Swiss family labor in watchmaking competes in cheapness with American machinery. The Bohemian cigar makers of New York, who work, men, women, and children, in their tenement house rooms, have reduced the prices of cigar making to less than the Chinese in San Francisco were getting. So that's made me curious about why we do think that like lawyers and doctors work long hours, and I think they do. I've always wondered exactly what's forcing them to that. And I'm not super sure they do after they reach a certain level in their career because then they just, you know, I know my dad, like, you know, he had his weekends off and would like golf on most Wednesdays. I know that he would be on call a lot. And I mean, he still works and he's in his 70s. He enjoys working. He definitely works reduced hours now. Um, and there's definitely like a selection mechanic of like the people who just prefer to work a long amount of time are definitely much more likely to go to med school and be successful there. So it sort of selects for that. We also artificially limit how many doctors we can have. I'm not as familiar with the law industry, and I know there's a much, yeah, I don't know. Be curious to hear anybody talk about that. Why exactly is it that lawyers and doctors work such long hours? And I don't, do we like I know we have the bar exam, of course. Um, but I feel like there's a bunch of lawyers who don't really make a lot of money or do that well. So I don't know if we actually artificially limit the number of lawyers versus how we treat doctors. I don't know. George continues. You know, no, let's finish. No, let's end it here. See you tomorrow. Don't forget all of my calls to action. Lawyers have to do a lot of paperwork to prepare for cases. The natural process of justice requires no stone being turned in a case. It seems they get paid a lot for such paperwork, though. Yeah, it definitely seems like they do a lot of paperwork. That cannot be disputed. Some I don't think that's very common, but it is something you can just study in jail. I definitely feels like being a lawyer is something a lot of people can just grind out if they're motivated to do it. Um, and they don't need a particular um, mentor or teacher. I feel like it's much harder to teach yourself science or math or physics in this way. Um, and of course, you can't. Yeah. This is from the diffusion of education and improved habits of industry and thrift. I should maybe just have this open on the other page when I'm. If one person is thrifty, they can save. If all the poor are thrifty, their wages will go down. Examples from cigar makers, examples of cigar makers, watchmakers, China versus USA, England versus Bengal. Alright, Also essentially involve other people in a way they seem to rely on explain their judgments. I see. Yeah. Yeah. And they know that they can make money off of it, whereas, like, cause all you need really is to pass the bar. You can start off as a lawyer, whereas, being a doctor, you need credentials, um, and it's like gonna be tough to teach yourself coding because they like limit access to computers in the in the joint. HGD 60, Book 6, Chapter 1, Remedy 2. Getting smarter, working harder, or living cheaper won't help the poor. Smarter, harder, cheaper. No use for the poor. The second remedy currently advocated for is individually, a person can improve their lot by working harder, smarter, cheaper. As a class, the renters will only serve will only increase their rent if they do so. There we go. Don't they only let in a limited number of lawyers in at every bar exam? The market is considered in danger of being which means the ones who are already practicing are assured their control. I suspect that's correct. I don't know. I don't know if they limit the number of people can sit for it, and if it's an absolute um, scale, like if you get X number of questions correct, you pass, or if you just have to be in the top half of people to pass, or like I don't know. But I would not be surprised at all if there is an artificial limitation on the number of lawyers. Is a pyramid a poor use of land compared to an upside down pyramid? I don't know. I would say that a pyramid used to be the gravestone of one human is not a good use of land. in Georgia is viewed as an upside pyramid and less payable land tax and upper. What do you think? If it is a land tax that is independent of the structure built on that land, which one would be more? What have you been listening to? Sometimes, Scrubbles, I worry that you're not truly a Georgist. Okay, if you're arguing that an upside down pyramid takes up less land than a right side up pyramid, I understand. I don't know if what about a really big tree then? Does it only let use but I'm assuming it will. So, since our nation and society is not super um, vertically oriented, um, there is. You'd have to look into real estate law. There is a convention about how much vertical airspace is assumed to go with the purchase of a piece of land. Of course, with zoning regulations, there's all these rules about how high you can build and that kind of thing. Uh, Georgists do talk about the land use or land-like asset of airspace and takeoff and landing times and the noise that that causes in certain areas. Um, so basically, any kind of volume that exists anywhere is a land-like asset. Space is a land-like asset. Um, I suppose at root you would need to tie your space to some kind of coordinate system, right? So you need a reference point. Because how do you define a cube of space out in like space? Um, but yeah, if you had a pyramid, um, if it were only on this plot of land, and then somebody over here on the next plot of land tried to build their house, and they're like, hey, what's going on here? And over here, they tried to build a skyscraper. It would be, hey, you're in our airspace. Yeah, there could be some kind of arrangement come to. Especially like if they needed, if this like plot of land, they're like, we like the shade, and they're like, you know, this is a field. I don't know. And depends on like what's going on up here. Maybe these are movie screens. It's just a big old movie theater. But this would all be determined by the land rental price. Whoever's willing to pay the highest rental price for the areas get to use them in the way they see best. I find it unlikely that an upside down pyramid would be the best use of many plots of land and adjacent airspace, but it might be so if you're willing to pay for it. All right. Um, all right. Tokyo big site. They have an upside down pyramid in Tokyo. You're dead. You're dead. You're dead. I'm back, but I'm gonna go. See you later, alligator.